When we arrived at my father-in-law's farm, it was a warm, sunny afternoon. My husband, Lucas, was excited, looking forward to spending the weekend with his family. I tried to share the same excitement, but there was a hint of nervousness that I couldn't ignore. The farm was huge, with green fields stretching as far as the eye could see, and the main house, a rustic wooden building, looked welcoming. Upon getting out of the car, we were greeted with warm hugs. My mother-in-law, always full of energy, immediately took us inside, showing us the new decorations she had made in the living room. My father-in-law, Roberto, was a little more distant, but she still gave us a warm smile. After we settled into the guest room, I went downstairs to help my mother-in-law in the kitchen. She had planned a delicious meal for dinner, and I wanted to be helpful. We were laughing and talking when she received an urgent call from a friend. She quickly apologized, saying she needed to leave for a while, but would be back before dinner. I was alone in the kitchen, continuing with the preparations. That's when Roberto entered. He offered to help, and I accepted, grateful for the company. The conversation started lightly and friendly. We talked about the weather, the farm, and how happy he was to see his family together. However, as the conversation progressed, I began to feel a certain tension in the air. Roberto got a little closer than necessary. His occasional touches seemed to last a second longer than usual. He complimented me in a way that made me feel uncomfortable, but also strangely flattered. He talked about what a wonderful addition I was to the family and how lucky Lucas was to have me. That tension was new to me, a mix of discomfort and excitement. I tried to laugh and divert attention, but it was impossible not to notice how his eyes followed me. When the dessert was almost ready, he approached me from behind, claiming to want to taste the sauce I was making. His presence so close made my heart race, and when he placed his hand over mine to pick up the spoon, I felt a shiver run through my body. It was a strange moment, where the line between innocent and inappropriate began to blur. Although neither of us said anything directly, there was a silent language that we both understood. I pulled away a little, trying to regain my composure, but the impact of that brief contact was already made. After that tense moment in the kitchen, the night ran its course relatively normally. We all had dinner together, and the atmosphere was happy. I tried to avoid being alone with Roberto, but he seemed to find subtle ways to get closer. After dinner, Lucas and I went to our room, and he quickly fell asleep. I, however, became restless, reliving the events in my mind. The next morning, I woke up early and went downstairs to prepare breakfast. The house was silent, still enveloped in the calm of dawn. As I prepared the coffee and bread, I heard light footsteps approaching. It was Roberto. He walked into the kitchen with a soft smile, looking perfectly at ease. "Good morning, Mariana," he said in a low and hoarse voice, as if he didn't want to wake the others. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was racing. He walked over and, in one casual movement, picked up a cup and poured himself some coffee. We were silent for a moment, just the sound of the coffee maker filling the air. Then he started talking about the farm, about how he and my mother-in-law had worked hard to keep everything in order. I listened intently, trying to focus on the conversation, and not on the fact that we were alone. But the tension grew again. At one point, while my back was turned to him, I felt his presence approaching again. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, and I turned to face him. Our eyes met, and for a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. "Mariana, you are a special person," he said, his voice filled with an intensity that I couldn't ignore. Before I could respond, he leaned over and kissed me. It was a brief kiss, but full of emotion. My body reacted instinctively, a mixture of shock and undeniable attraction. I walked away quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Roberto, we can't," I murmured, my voice shaking. He took a step back, his eyes still fixed on mine. "I know, Mariana, I know, but it's hard to ignore how I feel," he said, his voice a mix of desire and regret. The tension between Roberto and I only increased. I felt caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, trying to maintain my composure while my mind was in chaos. That quick, furtive kiss had awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore, even though I knew how wrong it was. That afternoon, Lucas and my mother-in-law left to resolve some issues in the city, leaving me alone on the farm. I tried to occupy myself with small tasks, but my mind kept returning to Roberto. That's when I heard footsteps approaching again. Roberto entered the room where I was arranging some books on the shelf. "Everything is fine?" he asked, with genuine concern in his eyes. I nodded, trying to appear unconcerned. "Yes, I am well. Just a little tired, I think." He got closer, and I could feel the tension between us increasing with each step. He picked up a book and started leafing through it, but soon put it aside. "Mariana, about what happened earlier," he began, but I interrupted him. "Roberto, we can't do that. It's wrong and—" My voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He moved even closer, his intense gaze boring into mine. I felt my heart speed up again, and my whole body tensed. "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice soft but full of emotion. "But I can't stop thinking about you." Before I could react, he leaned in and kissed me again, this time with more intensity. I wanted to resist. I wanted to move away, but my body seemed to have a mind of its own. I responded to the kiss, and soon we were involved in a dance of emotions and desires. His hands slid down my back, bringing me even closer. The sensation of her touches was electrifying, making my entire body tingle. The kisses became more intense, and the room seemed to get hotter and hotter. We felt the weight of the forbidden, but that only made everything more intense. Each moment seemed to stretch on indefinitely, a mixture of pleasure and guilt enveloping us. When we finally pulled away, we were both panting, our eyes shining with a mixture of desire and regret. This can't go on," I whispered, trying to regain my breath and reason. Roberto nodded, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "I know, Mariana, but I can't help how I feel about you." After that intense moment with Roberto, my mind became a real battlefield. Guilt began to eat away at me, and every time I looked at Lucas, I felt an even greater weight. He didn't suspect anything, always so attentive and affectionate. This only made the situation more unbearable. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid Roberto as much as possible. I kept myself busy with any chore I could find on the farm, from gardening to cleaning the house. But his presence was constant, even when he wasn't around. I could feel his eyes on me, and it only increased my guilt. There were times when I thought about confessing everything to Lucas, but the idea of hurting him and destroying our family paralyzed me. At the same time, I felt a mixture of anger and frustration that Roberto had approached me like that, knowing how vulnerable I was, but I couldn't deny that I had also been responsible, and that tortured me. One afternoon, while I was in the barn arranging some tools, Roberto appeared. I knew we would eventually have to talk about what had happened, but I wasn't ready yet. "Mariana, we need to talk," he said, with a serious expression on his face. I sighed, knowing I couldn't avoid it forever. "Roberto, I know, but what can we say? What happened was a mistake. A big mistake. He approached, and his expression softened. I know it was wrong, but I can't pretend I don't have feelings for you, and I know you feel the same, no matter how much you try to deny it. I lowered my head, feeling tears form in my eyes. The truth was, no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't deny my feelings. But that didn't change the fact that we were cheating on Lucas. Roberto, this cannot continue. I love Lucas, and I don't want to hurt him. We need to stop this once and for all. He nodded, but there was visible pain in his eyes. I understand, Mariana, but know that no matter how hard we try, these feelings won't go away so easily. Our brief encounter was interrupted by the sound of Lucas's car arriving. We quickly walked away, trying to look as normal as possible. When Lucas entered the barn, he found us separated, busy with our own tasks. Hey, you two, what are you doing here? He asked with a smile on his face. Just packing a few things, darling, I replied, trying to hide my uneasiness. Lucas pulled me into a hug, and I tried to stay calm. Feeling his arms around me only increased my guilt, but I knew I needed to be strong. I needed to find a way to deal with this situation without destroying our family. The tension between Roberto and I did not ease, despite my efforts to avoid being alone with him. Lucas and my mother-in-law were always busy with tasks on the farm, leaving many opportunities for Roberto and I to meet up. I knew I needed to be strong, but every time he was close, I felt an irresistible pull. One afternoon, Lucas and my mother-in-law went shopping in the city, leaving me alone on the farm again. I was in the garden, taking care of the plants, trying to distract myself. The sun was high and the heat was intense, but nothing compared to the heat she felt when Roberto approached. Mariana, he called softly, and I knew there was no way to avoid that moment. I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on my pants and turning to him. His eyes were fixed on mine, and there was an intensity there that made me shiver. We need to talk, he said, approaching. Roberto, I already said this needs to stop, I replied, but my voice didn't have the conviction I wanted. I know, but I can't stop thinking about you. Please just listen to me. He took my hand, and the touch made my heart race. I should have walked away, but I stayed there, caught between desire and guilt. He pulled me to a more secluded corner of the garden, away from prying eyes. I know it's wrong, but my feelings for you are real. I can't ignore it, he said, his voice an emotionally charged whisper. Roberto, My voice trailed off and he leaned in to kiss me. This time the kiss was more intense, full of repressed passion. My body responded immediately, and before we knew it, we were engaged in a dance of touches and kisses. His arms wrapped around me, bringing me closer, and I let myself be carried away by the moment, forgetting everything around us. Every touch, every caress made my body vibrate. The intensity of the moment consumed us, and although we knew it was wrong, we couldn't stop. The sun's heat seemed small compared to the fire we felt. When we finally pulled away, we were both panting. Reality came back with a vengeance, bringing back the guilt and regret. This really needs to stop, I said, my voice a mix of firmness and sadness. Roberto nodded, although his eyes were still full of desire. I know, Mariana, but know that I will always have these feelings for you. After that second meeting in the garden, the guilt and internal conflict became unbearable. Every moment I spent with Lucas, I felt like I was betraying not only his trust, but also myself. I needed to make a definitive decision. something that could put an end to this emotional torture. One night, while Lucas and I were in bed, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his calm breathing beside me. Finally, I got up and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. To my surprise, I found Roberto sitting at the table, also unable to sleep. "Mariana," he whispered, as if afraid to wake the others. "We need to talk, Roberto." "Now," I replied, my voice steady. He nodded and followed me out of the house. The night was cold, and the starry sky seemed to wrap us in a blanket of serenity. We walked to a bench in the garden where we sat down. "This cannot continue, Roberto. We need to stop this once and for all," I began, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "I know, Mariana, I know. But what are we going to do with these feelings?" he asked, the pain evident in his voice. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "We cannot continue with something that will destroy our lives and those of those we love. I love Lucas, and you love my mother-in-law. We have to think about them, and not just ourselves." He was silent for a moment, looking at the floor. When he finally raised his head, there was a resolve in his eyes. "You are right. We need to end this. I promise I'll keep my distance and try to forget what happened." I nodded, feeling relief mixed with sadness. "Thank you, Roberto. Let's do this for everyone's sake." Over the next few days, we made a conscious effort to avoid alone time. Interactions were brief and polite, always maintaining a certain distance. Lucas didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, which was a relief, but also a constant reminder of the secret I was carrying. The tension was still present, but it began to lessen over time. Roberto and I managed to keep our promises, although there were times when an accidental look or touch brought back memories of what had happened. The decision to put an end to it was difficult, but necessary. We knew that despite the attraction and feelings, we couldn't destroy our families. We learned to live with the guilt and work to rebuild normality.